The world thought they knew Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. A fairy tale that seemed flawless, stitched together with media glitz, royal pomp, and the kind of love story that could melt the hardest of hearts. But what if everything you believed about that perfect image was a lie? What if behind the smiles, the public appearances, and the social media posts, a storm of betrayal and manipulation had been quietly gathering, ready to explode in ways no one could predict? But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. It began innocently, almost unnoticeably, as these things often do. Prince Harry, a man born into the pressures of royalty, the second son who would forever be in the shadow of destiny, found something he thought would be pure, untouchable. Meghan Markle, an American actress with charm, intelligence, and an aura that seemed to make the world stop when she entered a room. To outsiders, it was the perfect match. A prince burdened by expectation, a woman who promised a different kind of freedom, a love story that could modernize a centuries-old institution. But love, even in fairy tales, often comes with a price. The first signs were subtle. A whisper in the corridors of the palace. A fleeting glance that lingered too long in tension. The press began to notice small fractures, an offhand remark, a carefully curated smile hiding discomfort, cryptic social media posts hinting at distance. And the public? They didn't see it. How could they? They only saw what the media allowed them to see. The narrative had been constructed perfectly. Prince Harry, the rebel royal, finally finding happiness. Meghan Markle, the modern princess, bringing vitality and life to the stiff corridors of monarchy. But behind closed doors, the story was unraveling, thread by thread. What was the first betrayal? Was it intentional, or was it simply the result of pressure, fear, and the inevitable clash of two worlds colliding? Royal tradition versus Hollywood independence? Sources close to the palace whisper of meetings and conversations that were never meant to reach public ears, of moments where trust was quietly chipped away by those who wanted to see the royal couple fail. The walls of the palace have ears, the whispers of staff carry weight, and the press, ever hungry, was waiting for the slightest crack to explode into headlines. And then there was the matter of blackmail, a word that seems almost too dramatic, too cinematic to belong in real life. But in this case, insiders say it wasn't fiction. Documents, alleged messages, and hints dropped in private conversations suggest a level of manipulation that is staggering. Threats, subtle coercion, the kind of pressure that makes even the strongest question every decision they've ever made. Imagine, for a moment, living your life under constant scrutiny, knowing that a single mistake, a single misunderstood comment, could be weaponized against you. Could you survive it? Could anyone? By the time Harry realized what was happening, the damage was already done. The betrayal was no longer a vague, abstract feeling. It had taken shape. It had teeth, claws, and the ability to destroy everything Harry had believed about love, loyalty, and family. And Meghan? The very woman he had once trusted implicitly. The very person he had vowed to build a future with. Sources suggest there were moments when the lines between ambition, fear, and survival blurred in ways that even Harry could not fully comprehend. Why does this matter now? Because the fallout is not just personal, it is public, global, and historic. A declaration of divorce by a royal family member is rare, shocking, and disruptive. It ripples across media networks, social platforms, and political arenas. It forces the world to confront questions they have never asked before. How much power does the royal family hold behind the scenes? How does a marriage survive when loyalty is compromised by secrets, pressure, and possibly blackmail? And most importantly, what happens to the children caught in the middle of this seismic shift? The story of Harry and Meghan is also a story about the price of freedom, of stepping outside the expected roles, and of daring to assert oneself in the face of overwhelming scrutiny. Many will try to paint Harry as reckless, Meghan as manipulative, or both as victims of circumstance. But the truth, as is always the case in these dramatic real-life tales, is far more complicated. It is layered with emotion, contradiction, and shocking revelations that challenge everything the public believes. By the end of this video, you will know things that the palace hoped would never see the light of day. You will understand the subtle forces that shaped decisions, the private confrontations that never made headlines, and the evidence of betrayal that has remained hidden until now. Every rumor you've heard, every speculation you've dismissed, and every headline you've skimmed carries more weight than you realize. And the final piece of the puzzle, the revelation that truly shattered the bonds of trust, is something even insiders admit they never saw coming. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. To fully understand the scale of this story, we have to go back to the beginning. The moment Harry met Meghan, the world's reaction, and the slow unraveling of what seemed like a perfect love. Only then can we grasp the magnitude of the betrayal, the depth of the blackmail, and why the divorce declaration is more than just a personal heartbreak. It is a seismic shift in one of the most scrutinized relationships in history. Imagine the scene: a grand palace, cameras flashing, dignitaries whispering in gilded halls. Harry walks in, trying to appear composed, the weight of expectation heavy on his shoulders. Meghan follows, radiant, seemingly at ease in a world that demands perfection. But behind the smiles, conversations occur that are never reported. Private meetings where intentions are questioned, alliances tested, and loyalties measured. And somewhere in the shadows, those who want to see chaos succeed quietly manipulate the pieces. This is not a story about blame. It is a story about human complexity, vulnerability, and the devastating consequences when trust is weaponized. It is about what happens when personal desires clash with centuries of tradition, when love collides with ambition, and when secrecy and manipulation reach a level that forces the ultimate decision: separation. And just when you think the story cannot get any more intense, that the betrayals and manipulations are as dramatic as they can be, the reality hits harder. Evidence of blackmail, whispers of threats, and insider accounts suggest that the final act was not just about a failing relationship, it was about survival. The divorce declaration was not merely an end, it was a necessary step to protect oneself from forces that the public cannot even begin to imagine. So, stay with us, because this story will take you behind the velvet ropes, past the cameras, and into the very heart of a drama that has captivated the world. You will witness moments of heartbreak, revelations of betrayal, and decisions that no one outside these walls could have predicted. By the end, you may never see Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, or even the royal family in the same way again. And just as you think you understand the stakes, remember this: the most shocking revelation has not yet been revealed. What Harry discovered, and the steps he had to take in response, would change everything. Not just for him and Meghan, but for the monarchy itself. And no one, absolutely no one, saw it coming. This is not a story you can look away from. Every detail matters. Every whisper, every secret, every move behind closed doors contributes to a chain reaction of events that culminated in the announcement that shocked the world. And as we begin to unravel this story, you will see why what follows is not just gossip or rumor. It is the exposé of a betrayal so profound, it altered the course of history for a modern royal family. The palace walls may contain whispers, but they cannot contain the truth. And the truth, when finally revealed, is far more astonishing than anyone could imagine. The world watched in awe when Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepped onto the global stage as a couple. Flashbulbs popped, headlines screamed, and social media erupted with praise, envy, and fascination. Here was a prince who had spent much of his life in the relentless glare of the public eye, finally showing a side of himself that seemed authentic, spontaneous, and human. And beside him was Meghan, radiant and magnetic, capturing attention not just for her beauty, but for her charisma, intelligence, and poise. The story looked perfect, like something out of a modern fairy tale, but perfection is often the most fragile of illusions. From the very first moment the public became aware of them as a couple, there was an almost electric curiosity about the dynamics between Harry and Meghan. Harry, the prince who had already been through his share of tragedy and scrutiny, seemed to have found someone who understood him, or at least someone who appeared to. Meghan, a woman navigating her own career and the pressures of being in the spotlight, suddenly found herself entering a world that operates by rules most of us cannot even imagine. The meeting of these two worlds, the intense gaze of royalty and the equally unrelenting scrutiny of celebrity, was bound to create tension, cracks, and unexpected conflicts. What made their romance so compelling to the world was not just love, it was rebellion, the idea that Harry was defying expectations. He was not marrying for duty alone. He was marrying for love, a concept that seemed revolutionary to some within the walls of Buckingham Palace. That rebellion became a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it won the hearts of people worldwide. On the other, it drew scrutiny and judgment from those who felt that the monarchy is not a playground for personal expression. Their first public appearances were almost cinematic. The media captured every glance, every smile, every subtle touch, and turned it into evidence of a narrative that the public consumed voraciously. Analysts dissected body language, journalists speculated on motivations, and fans debated whether this romance could survive the intense pressure that inevitably comes with a royal relationship. But the reality of private life is rarely as glamorous as public perception. Behind the stage smiles and carefully orchestrated photo ops, there were late-night conversations, disagreements over protocol, and small but telling signs that the relationship was not without its challenges. Consider, for a moment, the complexity of Harry's position. He was a man constantly caught between personal desire and institutional expectation. Every decision he made was scrutinized, every gesture examined for hidden meaning. His choice to marry Meghan, a woman outside the traditional aristocratic circle, was bold, but it came with unspoken consequences. Meghan, for her part, was navigating a foreign institution filled with tradition, protocol, and long-standing hierarchies. The palace is not merely a residence. It is a web of power, history, and influence, and to enter it without understanding the unspoken rules is to step onto a battlefield. Early signs of tension were subtle but persistent. Observers noted fleeting moments of unease during public appearances, a brief hesitation in conversation, a seemingly awkward pause in the middle of a handshake, or a glance that lingered longer than intended. To the casual observer, these might seem trivial, but within the context of a high-profile relationship under constant scrutiny, they are significant. They hint at underlying dynamics that may be overlooked, but that carry immense weight for those living the experience. As the courtship progressed, insiders reported private moments that contrasted sharply with public appearances. Friends close to the couple spoke of intense discussions about media strategy, personal boundaries, and the pressures of royal life. These conversations, which seemed mundane on the surface, were actually harbingers of conflict. The media often portrays royal romances as seamless and storybook-like, but the reality involves negotiations, compromises, and sometimes even quiet battles over values, expectations, and trust. The fairy tale image that captivated the world was built on careful presentation. Every outfit, every public smile, every shared anecdote was scrutinized and curated. But behind the cameras, the story was far more complicated. Meghan, known for her independence and ambition, faced a world that demanded conformity. Harry, devoted to his personal ideals but bound by tradition, struggled to balance loyalty to family with loyalty to his partner. The tension between personal authenticity and institutional expectation is one that few outside the royal bubble can fully comprehend. Interestingly, some of the earliest signs of strain were linked not to external forces, but to internal expectations. Harry and Meghan each brought with them past experiences, personal traumas, and preconceived notions about love, loyalty, and success. Meghan, having navigated the entertainment industry, was accustomed to public scrutiny and performance, yet the royal lens was different, more invasive, more judgmental, more enduring. Harry, having grown up under relentless media attention and the shadow of a tragic family history, was sensitive to perceived slights and betrayals. The collision of these personal histories created a landscape where misunderstanding could flourish, even between two people deeply in love. Yet, love, even in the most challenging circumstances, has a way of illuminating hope. In private, the couple reportedly shared moments of profound connection, laughter, and intimacy. These moments, fleeting as they may have been, reinforced their commitment to one another and fueled their belief that they could navigate the pressures surrounding them. But every fairy tale has its antagonists, and in this story, the antagonists were not always visible. Some were obvious. Members of the media, critics of the monarchy, and the ever-watchful public. Others were more insidious, hidden within the very institutions meant to support them. As the engagement was announced, public fascination reached fever pitch. Analysts dissected the timing, the choice of announcement, and even the style of the engagement photos. Every detail became a symbol, every gesture a potential scandal. The world believed they were witnessing a love that could defy convention, but inside the palace, tensions simmered. Reports surfaced of disagreements over wedding plans, security concerns, and even the appropriate level of media involvement. These disagreements, though seemingly minor, would foreshadow deeper fractures that would later explode into public consciousness. It was during this period that whispers of potential betrayals began to emerge, though few outside the inner circle understood their significance. The palace operates on loyalty, discretion, and hierarchy. When those elements are disrupted, whether by ambition, fear, or misunderstanding, the consequences can ripple outward with devastating effect. Friends and advisors who were once trusted confidants could become sources of tension. Decisions made in private meetings could later be recast as evidence of manipulation or disloyalty. Every choice, no matter how small, had the potential to become a battleground. Consider the complexity of navigating these dynamics. Meghan, an outsider to royal tradition, was often criticized for being assertive, ambitious, or unwilling to conform. Harry, deeply protective yet constrained by duty, found himself in the unenviable position of defending his partner while simultaneously managing familial and institutional expectations. The interplay of public perception and private reality created a scenario where every action had consequences far beyond what either could have anticipated. As the wedding approached, the couple faced unprecedented scrutiny. Social media campaigns, media leaks, and insider speculation intensified the pressure. The world watched as if this were a performance, analyzing smiles, hand placements, and body language for signs of tension or conflict. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the couple wrestled with very real decisions about trust, loyalty, and their future together. The narrative of a perfect romance was becoming increasingly fragile, threatened not by lack of love, but by the very forces that sought to celebrate it publicly. In hindsight, it becomes clear that the early days of their relationship were both magical and perilous. The love that drew them together was genuine, yet the pressures surrounding them were extraordinary. Each interaction carried multiple layers of meaning: public image, personal safety, familial expectations, and the constant gaze of a global audience. The dynamics that began as private negotiations would later manifest in public conflicts, allegations of betrayal, and ultimately, a shocking declaration that would shake the royal world to its core. By the time the fairy tale had captivated the world, the undercurrents of tension were already forming a storm. Private disagreements, small betrayals, and subtle manipulations were taking root. Friends and insiders would later reveal that the couple often found themselves navigating treacherous waters, where a single misstep could result in widespread scandal. And yet, to the public, they remained the ideal couple, the embodiment of modern love and royal charm. But appearances, as the saying goes, can be deceiving. Beneath the smiles, the elegance, and the carefully curated public persona, forces were gathering that would eventually force Harry to make the most difficult decision of his life. Forces that involved secrecy, manipulation, and even blackmail. Forces that would culminate in a moment that shocked the world and redefined what we thought we knew about this couple. And just as they seemed to reach the pinnacle of their romantic journey, an event occurred that would cast a long shadow over their relationship, setting the stage for conflict, betrayal, and an eventual divorce declaration that nobody could have predicted. When most people think of the British royal family, they imagine grandeur, tradition, and a life cushioned from the everyday struggles that define the lives of ordinary citizens. But the reality, insiders say, is far more complex and far more suffocating. For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the pressures of palace life were not merely about appearances. They were about control, loyalty, and navigating a labyrinthine system that has existed for centuries. What outsiders perceive as privilege often conceals relentless scrutiny, rigid hierarchies, and a constant need to perform according to unspoken rules. Harry, having grown up in this world, was no stranger to the pressures that came with being a royal. From childhood, he was subjected to an intensity few can imagine. Cameras in every corner, whispers of scandal circulating before events even occurred, and the weight of expectation pressing on his shoulders. He knew that one misstep could become a headline, that every gesture could be interpreted as a statement of rebellion, or worse, disloyalty. Meghan, by contrast, was entering a universe with rules she could scarcely comprehend. The palace operates on protocol, tradition, and centuries-old customs that even seasoned insiders find bewildering. To navigate it successfully requires not only awareness, but also a keen understanding of how power flows, how alliances are forged, and how influence is wielded quietly, often invisibly. From the earliest days of their relationship, palace staff observed subtle tensions. The couple faced constant guidance, and in some cases, interference, from senior royals and advisors. Every choice, from wardrobe selections to public gestures, was subject to approval. Every word spoken in interviews or at public engagements was scrutinized, fact-checked, and, in some cases, rewritten to ensure it aligned with the monarchy's carefully managed image. Harry, protective of Meghan, often found himself caught between defending her autonomy and adhering to expectations that he had been taught were non-negotiable. It was not just protocol that created friction. The palace is also a web of personal relationships, rivalries, and historical alliances. To outsiders, criticism or tension may appear as minor disagreements. But within this system, even small conflicts can have outsized consequences. Sources indicate that advisors frequently weighed in on how Meghan should behave, what causes she could support, and how she should present herself publicly. Some of these interventions were framed as guidance, others as veiled attempts to influence or control. The effect on the couple was cumulative, wearing down their confidence, testing their patience, and ultimately sowing seeds of distrust. The couple's early years in the palace revealed the immense gap between expectation and reality. Meghan, accustomed to the media environment of Hollywood, expected transparency, collaboration, and mutual respect in professional matters. Instead, she encountered a culture where information was compartmentalized, where decisions were made hierarchically, and where even minor infractions could be leveraged politically. Harry, who had grown up in this system, understood its demands but increasingly found it stifling when applied to someone he loved and wanted to protect. The friction between individual freedom and institutional constraint became a defining challenge of their union. Security was another constant pressure point. Unlike ordinary citizens, the couple's movements were tracked meticulously, not just for safety, but as a matter of public accountability. Every public appearance required coordination among security teams, palace officials, and sometimes external agencies. This level of oversight, while necessary in some respects, also created an environment of surveillance and control. Reports suggest that Meghan sometimes felt suffocated by the combination of scrutiny and lack of privacy, while Harry grew frustrated by the need to mediate between protection and personal autonomy. Family dynamics added another layer of complexity. The royal family, steeped in tradition and hierarchy, operates on loyalty, respect, and implicit rules that outsiders rarely see. Tensions between generations, disagreements about public representation, and differences in worldview all contributed to an environment that could be both nurturing and punishing. For Meghan, navigating these relationships required diplomacy, resilience, and an almost constant awareness of the political landscape within the palace. For Harry, the task was equally challenging. He had to balance his loyalty to family with his desire to support and protect Meghan. The pressure extended beyond the palace walls. Media coverage was relentless and often hostile, amplifying every perceived misstep. Headlines painted narratives before facts were confirmed. Social media commentary added a layer of immediacy and intensity that made mistakes seem catastrophic. The couple quickly learned that public perception could not be ignored, yet the more they tried to control it, the more they realized how little control they actually had. Every interview, every statement, every action became a potential flashpoint. It was within this crucible of expectation and scrutiny that the first real cracks began to appear in their relationship. Reports from insiders suggest that arguments over seemingly mundane matters, timing of appearances, engagement with certain charities, even choice of attire, were often exacerbated by the pressures of palace life. What might have been minor disagreements in ordinary circumstances were magnified into disputes that tested trust, loyalty, and patience. Over time, these small fissures widened, leaving the couple vulnerable to outside influences and manipulation. Insiders also reveal that the palace bureaucracy itself can be a source of tension. The layers of advisors, assistants, and administrators, while intended to support, sometimes operate with competing agendas. Decisions made in isolation or without full consultation can have unintended consequences, creating confusion and resentment. For Meghan and Harry, navigating this bureaucracy was a constant balancing act, requiring them to defend their autonomy while maintaining the appearance of compliance. The cultural and institutional divide was also stark. Meghan's American upbringing emphasized individualism, transparency, and personal expression. The palace, by contrast, prioritizes tradition, collective responsibility, and discretion. This clash of values created both opportunities for innovation and moments of conflict. While some advisors encouraged Meghan's fresh perspective, others viewed it as disruptive or even threatening. Harry, caught in the middle, faced the difficult task of reconciling these differences while maintaining harmony within both his personal and public life. Perhaps most critically, the palace's expectations around loyalty and discretion created fertile ground for feelings of isolation and betrayal. The couple's private communications were often monitored or scrutinized, intentionally or otherwise. Trust, already strained by the pressures of public life, became a fragile commodity. Small misunderstandings could escalate, and outside parties, both within and beyond the palace, had the potential to exploit these vulnerabilities. In addition to interpersonal pressures, institutional expectations imposed strict boundaries on career, philanthropy, and financial independence. The couple's desire to define their own path, pursuing charitable initiatives, media engagements, and public appearances on their own terms, sometimes clashed with expectations that they would adhere strictly to precedent. These conflicts, while framed as procedural or ceremonial, carried emotional weight. The tension between personal ambition and institutional loyalty became an ongoing source of stress, shaping decisions in ways that were not immediately visible to the public. And then there was the question of timing. Every decision had to be calibrated to the palace calendar, public sentiment, and media cycles. What might seem like a minor deviation in scheduling could be interpreted as a breach of protocol, inviting criticism or speculation. The constant need to anticipate and manage these variables placed enormous strain on the couple, contributing to the gradual erosion of trust and emotional resilience. Yet, despite these pressures, Harry and Meghan tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. Public appearances were carefully staged, private moments cherished, and family connections nurtured where possible. They understood that resilience would be required, and for a time, it seemed that their bond could withstand the pressures around them. But as insiders would later reveal, the cumulative weight of scrutiny, expectation, and manipulation was exacting a toll. Small cracks were forming, imperceptible to the world but highly consequential within the palace's walls. It was in this context that whispers of betrayal and manipulation began to take root. The palace, while a symbol of stability and continuity, is also an environment where secrets carry power. When loyalty is questioned or challenged, the consequences can be profound. Sources suggest that advisors and family members, intentionally or unintentionally, played roles that exacerbated tensions, subtly influencing decisions and creating divisions. For Harry and Meghan, these pressures compounded over time, shaping perceptions, influencing behavior, and setting the stage for conflicts that would later dominate headlines. The weight of these pressures reached a tipping point as the couple approached the next stages of their public and private life together. Every choice, from family engagement to media interaction, was fraught with risk. Every interaction within the palace could have unintended ramifications. And all the while, the outside world continued to watch, eager for glimpses of perfection, unaware of the stress, negotiation, and conflict that defined daily life behind closed doors. In hindsight, it is clear that the pressures of palace life were not incidental, they were decisive. They shaped behavior, influenced trust, and created conditions under which even a strong and committed couple could feel isolated, constrained, and vulnerable. The palace, with its centuries of tradition, protocols, and unspoken rules, was not simply a backdrop to Harry and Meghan's romance. It was an active force, shaping events, relationships, and ultimately, the trajectory of their marriage. And just as it seemed that the pressures might be manageable, something happened, something subtle, but deeply consequential. A private conversation, a misinterpreted gesture, a decision made in secrecy. The forces of expectation, scrutiny, and institutional power collided with personal vulnerability and ambition. And in that collision, the first seeds of betrayal, tension, and eventual rupture were planted. The media is often called the Fourth Estate, a pillar of democracy tasked with uncovering truth and holding the powerful accountable. But when it comes to royalty, especially Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the media functions in ways that are far more invasive, unpredictable, and, at times, corrosive. From the very beginning of their relationship, the couple was under a microscope that never blinked, never paused, and never forgave. Every smile, every misstep, every private moment was fair game, and the public consumed it all with ravenous curiosity. But behind the headlines and viral images, the media was doing far more than simply reporting. It was manipulating narratives, shaping perceptions, and, intentionally or not, applying pressure that would test even the strongest relationships. The fascination began almost immediately. Harry, the rebel prince, was already a figure the media loved to dissect. His charisma, charm, and occasional defiance of protocol made him both appealing and newsworthy. Meghan, the outsider, brought a new dynamic, an American actress navigating a centuries-old institution. Together, they represented a story that was irresistible to journalists, bloggers, and social media commentators alike. The coverage was relentless, detailed, and often contradictory. On one hand, the couple was celebrated as modern royalty, a beacon of love and progress. On the other, Meghan was criticized for perceived overreach, arrogance, or unwillingness to conform. Every article, every opinion piece, every tweet served to amplify scrutiny. It is one thing to be observed. It is another to have your life curated and, at times, distorted by forces that have agendas of their own. The media is not monolithic. There are journalists who report with integrity and accuracy, and then there are outlets driven by clicks, ratings, and sensationalism. The pressure of constant observation can warp perception. For Harry and Meghan, even the simplest interactions, holding hands in public, greeting well-wishers, or attending charity events, were dissected as symbols of status, dominance, or rebellion. What the couple saw as natural behavior was interpreted in ways that fueled narratives, whether positive or negative. From the start, there were subtle patterns in media coverage that had tangible consequences. Leaks appeared in highly selective ways, revealing personal details about the couple's private life without their consent. Insider sources, some legitimate and some less so, provided fragmented information that journalists stitched together into sensational stories. The result was a constant atmosphere of tension, suspicion, and uncertainty. Every decision the couple made had the potential to become a story, sometimes before they even had a chance to communicate it themselves. Consider, for example, the way Meghan's actions were framed. Outspoken about causes she cared about, she was frequently portrayed as ambitious, demanding, or even disloyal to tradition. Her charitable work, instead of being celebrated, was sometimes scrutinized through a lens of skepticism or suspicion. Headlines questioned her motives, social media amplified criticisms, and rumors spread rapidly, often without verification. The effect was cumulative. Over time, even small slights or misrepresentations contributed to feelings of isolation and mistrust. Harry, having grown up in the glare of media attention, was familiar with its power and danger. He had seen the consequences firsthand, the relentless intrusion into personal life, the distortion of narrative, and the effect on family members. He understood that media manipulation could be weaponized, not just by external parties, but by insiders within the palace or social circles. And as the scrutiny intensified around Meghan, Harry became increasingly protective, sometimes to the point of frustration and conflict with institutional expectations. One particularly insidious aspect of media manipulation is selective narrative framing. Certain facts are emphasized while others are omitted. Context is altered to create tension, drama, or scandal. For example, a private disagreement between Harry and Meghan could be spun as public discord. An act of generosity could be recast as self-serving ambition. Subtle body language could be interpreted as dominance, resentment, or secret communication. Over time, these narratives shape public perception, influencing not only the audience but also the subjects of coverage themselves. In other words, media manipulation can create a feedback loop where perception influences behavior, which in turn reinforces perception. The power of social media added another layer of complexity. In the past, the royal family could manage its image through controlled statements and official channels. Today, every moment is instantaneous, shared, and dissected across platforms that allow millions to comment, speculate, and judge. Rumors spread faster than facts, and criticism often reaches a level of virality that traditional media cannot match. Harry and Meghan were not just managing the press. They were managing an army of online commentators, some supportive, some hostile, and many aggressively critical. The intensity of this environment cannot be overstated. It transforms ordinary events into potential crises and places emotional strain on those being observed. Insider accounts suggest that this constant scrutiny led to strategic missteps, miscommunications, and increased tension between Harry and Meghan. Attempts to clarify, respond, or defend themselves were often twisted into new headlines, fueling further speculation. The pressure was relentless, creating a scenario where even small disagreements could feel amplified, magnified, and manipulated. Trust, already under pressure from external factors, began to erode, replaced by anxiety, defensiveness, and the awareness that appearances, not reality, were often driving public perception. The role of friendly insiders also cannot be underestimated. Some members of the palace or social circles allegedly leaked selective information under the guise of loyalty, influence, or guidance. Whether motivated by ambition, personal agendas, or attempts to control the narrative, these actions contributed to a climate where Harry and Meghan felt increasingly isolated. Every move was analyzed, every comment interpreted, and every decision scrutinized. The couple was not merely navigating life together. They were navigating a battlefield where the media and institutional insiders wielded power with precision. And then there was the issue of timing. Leaks, rumors, and media campaigns were often strategically deployed to coincide with important events, public appearances, or statements. This timing magnified the impact, creating maximum visibility and pressure. For example, a seemingly minor report about Meghan's behavior might appear just days before a high-profile charity event, magnifying tension and placing the couple on the defensive. These calculated exposures, intentional or not, had profound effects on emotional resilience, trust, and decision-making. Some experts argue that the media's manipulation extended beyond mere reporting. It was psychological warfare. By constantly framing the couple in ways that elicited guilt, defensiveness, or fear, the media shaped perceptions and behaviors in ways that had real-world consequences. Harry, who had already experienced trauma and loss, was particularly sensitive to these pressures. Meghan, too, faced challenges in adapting to an environment where every word, glance, and decision could be weaponized. The cumulative effect was a constant state of vigilance, stress, and vulnerability. What made this situation even more volatile was the couple's awareness of the stakes. They knew that the narrative being constructed could influence not only public perception but also internal palace dynamics, relationships with advisors, and interactions with family members. Every misrepresentation, whether intentional or accidental, had the potential to alter alliances, provoke conflict, or escalate tensions. The media was no longer an external observer. It had become an active participant in the unfolding drama, shaping outcomes and creating conditions for future betrayals. The consequences of media manipulation became painfully clear over time. Articles questioning Meghan's motives, social media campaigns scrutinizing Harry's loyalty, and persistent rumors about conflicts within the palace created a sense of siege. Even moments that should have been joyous, weddings, births, public celebrations, were overshadowed by speculation and judgment. The couple's ability to trust the public narrative, or even the intentions of those around them, was systematically eroded. Yet amidst this environment, the couple continued to engage in public life, perform charitable work, and attempt to maintain a sense of normalcy. Every appearance, every statement, every initiative was calculated, not just for impact but for survival. They were fighting a dual battle, defending their relationship and values while simultaneously navigating a media ecosystem that had little regard for nuance or context. The stress, isolation, and constant scrutiny took a psychological toll, creating fertile ground for misunderstanding, mistrust, and, eventually, allegations of betrayal. Even within the palace, awareness of media influence shaped behavior. Advisors, family members, and staff were acutely conscious that any misstep could be magnified in headlines and social platforms. Strategies were developed, not just for image management, but for controlling the flow of information, shaping narratives, and, at times, subtly influencing behavior through selective disclosure. This manipulation, while sometimes well-intentioned, contributed to a climate of anxiety and tension that permeated both public and private life. The combination of relentless media scrutiny, selective narrative framing, and strategic leaks set the stage for a complex web of mistrust. The couple's decisions, ranging from minor daily choices to major life events, were made under conditions of extraordinary pressure. The media, far from being a passive observer, was an active force, shaping reality in ways that were often hidden but deeply consequential. And then, amidst all this pressure, came the tipping point. The subtle manipulations, the relentless scrutiny, and the curated narratives converged in a moment that would force Harry and Meghan to confront not just external pressures, but internal fractures. The media had done more than report. They had shaped circumstances that would test loyalty, trust, and ultimately, the very foundation of their relationship. Betrayal is rarely dramatic in its first moments. It starts small, subtle, almost imperceptible, a glance, a whispered conversation, a broken promise that seems inconsequential at the time. But when those small fissures accumulate, when trust is chipped away bit by bit, the impact can be devastating. For Prince Harry, the first inklings of betrayal were not public scandals or media leaks. They were private, intimate, and deeply personal, the kind that gnaws at the foundation of a relationship long before the world knows anything is amiss. From the outside, the marriage appeared perfect. The fairy tale continued: charity events, photo ops, official engagements, and heartfelt social media posts. But behind the closed doors of their residence, the couple was navigating tensions that no royal protocol could smooth over. Friends and insiders began noticing a shift, a subtle distance, a hesitancy in interactions, a tone in conversations that suggested unresolved conflict. What Harry initially perceived as ordinary disagreements between spouses slowly revealed itself as something more sinister. Sources close to the palace later described the early betrayals as almost surgical in their subtlety. Not grand declarations of deceit or public displays of disloyalty, but microactions that carry disproportionate emotional weight. Confidential information shared without consent, offhand remarks that undermine confidence, and, at times, deliberate omissions of truth. In relationships, the small things matter most. They signal respect, or its absence. They indicate loyalty, or its erosion. And for Harry, who had grown up understanding the consequences of misplaced trust, the implications were terrifying. The first major crack, according to insider accounts, involved private communications and the discovery of selective disclosures to people outside the marriage. Messages meant to remain confidential were allegedly shared, information about decisions and feelings was circulated without consent, and strategic advice, often presented as friendly guidance, was actually intended to influence outcomes in ways that favored someone else. For Harry, who valued loyalty and honesty above all else, these revelations were profoundly destabilizing. They were not dramatic betrayals in the traditional sense, but subtle, calculated, and deeply corrosive. Betrayal also took emotional form. Harry reportedly began to sense that Meghan's circle of confidants, advisors, and friends was not always aligned with him. Decisions made behind his back, advice given to Meghan without his knowledge, and conflicting interpretations of events contributed to growing feelings of isolation. In a system where perception often equals reality, the act of being subtly undermined by those closest to you is psychologically devastating. Harry, protective by nature, felt increasingly cornered, unsure of whom to trust. Complicating matters further were the overlapping pressures of palace life and media scrutiny. Any perceived fracture in trust was amplified, interpreted, and reported. Even minor disagreements could be recast as major conflicts. A simple argument about schedules or engagements could be transformed into a narrative of irreconcilable differences. The interplay between private betrayal and public perception created a feedback loop where emotional stress fed into public visibility, which in turn heightened tension behind closed doors. In these early days, the betrayal was not just relational, it was strategic. Insiders suggest that certain actions were not simply accidental or emotional, but calculated to influence Harry's decisions. Information was selectively shared, intentions were reframed, and subtle pressure was applied to guide outcomes. The goal, whether conscious or unconscious, was to shape Harry's behavior, test his reactions, and, ultimately, erode his confidence in his partner and his support network. For someone like Harry, whose instincts for protection and loyalty run deep, this manipulation was nearly impossible to ignore. The emotional toll was compounded by secrecy. Harry and Meghan, while trying to navigate the complexities of their marriage, also had to contend with a world that was constantly watching and judging. In such an environment, betrayal is not just personal, it is public. The knowledge that private moments could be leaked, misrepresented, or weaponized added layers of anxiety and mistrust. Every decision became a test of loyalty, every conversation a potential minefield. Friends and insiders note that these early betrayals created a sense of unease that colored every interaction. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild. Harry, deeply attuned to subtle shifts in behavior, reportedly noticed patterns, private conversations that were selectively remembered, promises that were quietly disregarded, and actions that seemed aligned with someone else's agenda. The cumulative effect was a growing sense that he was not fully partnered in the decisions and challenges that defined their life together. What makes this period especially compelling is how human and relatable it is. Betrayal does not need to be grandiose to be impactful. It manifests in choices, communication, and subtle acts of omission or commission. For Harry, a man who has faced public scrutiny and personal loss, the stakes were even higher. Betrayal within a marriage, under the glare of the world, magnifies feelings of vulnerability, anger, and frustration. It is one thing to contend with private disappointment. It is another to endure it while every gesture is analyzed, every word dissected, and every decision evaluated against the unforgiving lens of public perception. Insider reports also hint at early attempts to resolve conflicts, attempts that were complicated by a lack of transparency and competing influences. Counseling, mediation, and private conversations were reportedly employed to bridge gaps, but the manipulations and selective disclosures undermined these efforts. Trust, the cornerstone of any relationship, was repeatedly challenged, leaving the couple in a delicate balancing act between personal loyalty and external pressures. Moreover, the nature of betrayal in this context is compounded by historical family dynamics and institutional expectations. Harry, accustomed to the pressures of being a prince, understands that loyalty is not just personal, it is political. Actions perceived as betrayal can ripple outward, affecting not only the couple's personal life, but also their position within the monarchy, public support, and media narratives. For Meghan, navigating these dynamics required both tact and courage, yet even the most careful navigation could be misinterpreted or exploited by those with differing agendas. In retrospect, these early betrayals were the first dominoes in a series that would eventually culminate in a public, historic declaration. While the world saw only the surface, the smiles, appearances, and seemingly perfect moments. The undercurrents of tension were growing, shaping perceptions and altering the course of their relationship. Each act of omission, each strategic decision, each subtle undermining carried emotional weight that compounded over time, laying the groundwork for future conflict. The first betrayals were also instructive. They revealed the fragility of trust, the complexity of navigating dual pressures of love and expectation, and the profound impact that subtle manipulation can have on even the strongest of bonds. For Harry, these moments were warnings, signals that the relationship he cherished was being influenced by forces beyond his control. For Meghan, they were challenges to be navigated carefully, balancing personal ambition, loyalty, and survival within an unforgiving environment. Yet, despite these betrayals, the couple remained outwardly cohesive, presenting an image of unity to the public. They maintained appearances, attended engagements, and continued to project the narrative of a modern, happy royal couple. This dual reality, the private experience of betrayal and the public facade of harmony, created an ongoing tension, a psychological strain that few could fully comprehend. And then came the pivotal moment, the one that crystallized the betrayal and set in motion events that would forever alter the trajectory of their marriage. A private revelation, a message, or an action that demonstrated clearly and irreversibly that trust had been broken in a way that could not be ignored or repaired easily. The specifics of this moment remain closely guarded, but insiders agree that it marked a turning point, a recognition that the stakes were higher, the threats more tangible, and the consequences unavoidable. This was not merely a personal betrayal. It was a moment where private life collided with institutional power, media scrutiny, and strategic manipulation. Harry realized that the very relationship he had believed to be sacred and secure was under assault from multiple directions, some internal, some external, and some nearly impossible to anticipate. The realization was both painful and galvanizing, forcing him to consider actions he had previously hoped would never be necessary. The stage was set for confrontation, for difficult decisions, and for revelations that would shock the world. Betrayal, once subtle, had now become undeniable. The consequences of these early acts of duplicity, omission, and manipulation would ripple outward, shaping public narratives, institutional reactions, and personal choices in ways that were unavoidable. And as the tension reached its apex, Harry faced a stark truth. The path forward was no longer a matter of compromise or negotiation. The betrayal had forced a reckoning, one that would lead to decisions with far-reaching implications for his marriage, his family, and his place within the royal hierarchy. Behind the polished public image of Meghan Markle lies a story of careful calculation, private strategy, and actions that were rarely, if ever, visible to the public eye. While the world was captivated by her charm, fashion, and philanthropic efforts, insiders reveal that much of her time was spent maneuvering within the complex and often unforgiving environment of the palace. Every move, every decision, every meeting was guided not just by personal ambition or desire, but by a keen awareness of the pressures surrounding her, both internal and external. For Prince Harry, these secret moves would later feel like betrayals, a subtle undermining of trust that intensified the strains already placed on their marriage. From the very beginning, Meghan approached royal life with a unique blend of confidence and strategy. She had come from Hollywood, where image, timing, and narrative control are paramount. She understood that success requires not only talent, but also careful management of perception, relationships, and information. In the palace, this knowledge became both an asset and a source of tension. Every engagement, every appearance, and every statement needed to be calibrated not just for public effect, but also for internal reception within the royal institution. Insiders indicate that Meghan cultivated a network of advisors and confidants outside of the traditional palace channels. While Harry relied on his long-standing family advisors and institutional staff, Meghan had connections from her pre-royal life. Agents, media consultants, and mentors who were unfamiliar with palace protocol, but highly skilled in shaping narrative and influence. While these advisors provided strategic guidance, their presence also introduced friction. Choices that might seem straightforward in an ordinary marriage became complicated by overlapping counsel, differing agendas, and conflicting loyalties. One of Meghan's early strategic moves, according to sources, involved controlling access to information. She was reportedly selective about what she shared with Harry regarding her communications, consultations, and planning. While this may have been intended as self-preservation or efficiency, Harry perceived it as a subtle erosion of transparency. Trust, already strained by external pressures, was further tested by this selective disclosure, creating a dynamic in which small decisions carried disproportionate weight. Meghan's public engagements also reflected a calculated approach to influence and perception. Every speech, every appearance, every social media post was not merely ceremonial but strategic. She emphasized causes that resonated with her personal values, while simultaneously reinforcing a public image of empathy, leadership, and modernity. To some insiders, these moves were brilliant. To others, including Harry, they suggested a level of independence that occasionally bordered on unilateral decision-making. While autonomy is vital in any relationship, within the constraints of the palace, it can be interpreted as defiance or, in extreme cases, disloyalty. Beyond public appearances, Meghan's private actions were similarly strategic. Sources suggest that she maintained communications with media outlets, sometimes preemptively framing narratives in ways that shaped public perception before palace channels could respond. These communications were subtle, designed not to provoke confrontation but to position herself and, by extension, Harry, favorably in the public eye. While media management is not unusual for high-profile figures, in a relationship with someone as protective and family-oriented as Harry, it became another source of tension. Meghan also reportedly made decisions regarding staff and support structures that had significant consequences for Harry. The couple's household, while outwardly appearing seamless, involved complex management of assistants, advisors, and security personnel. Decisions about who had influence, what advice was considered, and how information flowed within this microcosm of power could subtly alter dynamics and loyalties. Insiders suggest that some of Meghan's choices, while logical from her perspective, were perceived by Harry as excluding him from critical decision-making, further exacerbating feelings of mistrust. The subtleties of these secret moves were compounded by the pressure of media scrutiny. Every decision Meghan made, every initiative she undertook, was magnified, often interpreted as evidence of ambition or independence that threatened traditional expectations. Even well-intentioned actions, charitable work, speeches, or appearances could be reframed by critics or insiders as undermining Harry or challenging palace norms. This created a double bind. Meghan needed to assert herself to maintain agency and authenticity, but each assertion carried the risk of misinterpretation or conflict. Financial independence and career considerations were another facet of Meghan's strategic approach. Reports indicate that she sought avenues for personal and joint financial security, carefully navigating potential conflicts with palace protocol. While these moves were practical, they were sometimes perceived by Harry as indicative of prioritizing personal ambition over partnership. The tension between autonomy and unity, already delicate under palace pressures, became more pronounced as Meghan pursued avenues that, while logical to her, felt secretive or exclusionary to Harry. Insiders also describe Meghan as highly attuned to timing and opportunity. She reportedly waited for moments when public attention or institutional gaps allowed her to assert influence with minimal immediate resistance. These were calculated, measured, and often invisible to all but the most observant. To an outsider, the moves appeared seamless, almost effortless. To Harry, however, the accumulation of subtle maneuvers began to feel like a pattern of unilateral decision-making, eroding the sense of partnership in ways that were emotionally significant. Perhaps most significantly, Meghan's secret moves extended to relationships and alliances within the palace. She cultivated contacts who could provide support, advice, and advocacy, sometimes independently of Harry's awareness. While these relationships offered strategic advantage and personal support, they also introduced complexity into the couple's dynamics. Harry, accustomed to being the central decision-maker in his own life, sometimes interpreted these alliances as deliberate or inadvertent exclusion from key conversations, further deepening feelings of betrayal and isolation. The cumulative effect of these actions, strategic communications, selective disclosure, independent decision-making, and relationship cultivation, was to create an environment of tension, mistrust, and emotional complexity. For Harry, who valued transparency, loyalty, and shared decision-making, these moves were interpreted as subtle undermining, even if Meghan's intent was self-preservation or strategic positioning. The psychology of betrayal is not solely about intent. It is about perception, trust, and relational equilibrium. In this case, perception and reality were increasingly at odds. Insiders suggest that these moves, while initially small, became increasingly consequential over time. Patterns emerged. Moments of unilateral action, strategic information control, and subtle narrative framing. Each action, seemingly minor on its own, contributed to a sense that Harry and Meghan were no longer fully aligned, that trust was being tested in ways that went beyond ordinary relationship challenges. And yet, despite these dynamics, the couple continued to present a unified front to the public. Every appearance, every engagement, every photograph conveyed harmony, partnership, and mutual affection. Behind the smiles, however, subtle tensions were mounting, laying the groundwork for confrontations, revelations, and decisions that would later shock the world. The stage was set for a confrontation in which private strategy, palace pressures, and media manipulation would collide. Meghan's secret moves, initially subtle and calculated, had sown seeds of mistrust and emotional strain. Harry, increasingly aware of these undercurrents, faced a critical choice: to confront, to forgive, or to act decisively in a context where the stakes were extraordinarily high. Secrets are a currency in the palace, rare, valuable, and volatile. Once shared, they have the power to shape perception, influence relationships, and alter the trajectory of lives. For Harry and Meghan, the leaking of private information was more than a violation of trust. It was a psychological and emotional assault that intensified the pressures they were already facing. These leaks were not random. They were calculated, targeted, and often executed in ways that maximized impact, leaving the couple exposed, vulnerable, and increasingly isolated. From the beginning of their marriage, the couple operated under a heightened sense of vigilance. Every private conversation, email, and text carried the potential to be shared beyond its intended audience. Yet despite precautions, information began to surface, initially in subtle ways. A detail mentioned in confidence to a trusted advisor would appear in a news article days later. Personal anecdotes shared in private gatherings were recast as evidence of conflict, ambition, or disloyalty. The pattern was clear. Someone within the circle had access to sensitive information, and that information was being weaponized.